My name is Rue. So this channel, it's kind of a redo of another channel, but I'm going to be talking about some pretty advanced topics because some of the people I've been working with for a long time, some of the teachers I work with, where we're discussing things, I want to do videos about it. So to start off with, I need to cover some of the basics. So for instance, if I'm talking about the core veil, you guys need to know what the core veil is. So this specific video, I've got a few notes here if I'm looking down. I'm looking at and discussing how a soul is specifically created and how we are kind of created on a soul level. Now, a lot of this understanding comes from the teachings of Rick Wyman, who I think is fantastic. And a lot of this is in the book, Awakening Through the Core Veils, which is a much deeper explanation of this. So I want to kind of give a quick version of it. So essentially, if you've got divinity, so imagine divinity like this gigantic cloud, okay? But it's not, it's all things, it's everything, etc., etc. And it's, in order for it to experience itself, it's like if you're Superman, you would never understand fear because you've never had it. You're completely impervious. If you're a multi-trillionaire, you'd never understand money. All you understand is that you just have. If you want something, you have it. You wouldn't understand lack. So in order to appreciate things, we need to understand and experience the opposite of them. If I want to appreciate courage, I need to appreciate fear. I need to understand fear, which isn't a thing in itself, it's just the absence of courage. Okay, so in order to have something, we have to experience its absence. But for divinity to become aware of itself, for divinity to experience itself, it needs to be able to experience what it isn't. And obviously that's almost impossible for divinity to do. So imagine divinity sitting there, incredibly bored, and decides that to experience itself, it needs to do something. So we'll just do it as a little metaphor. We imagine a big piece of paper and this little bit comes off, okay? Or a big cloud, divinity, and this little lump comes off. Now, this is divinity itself. And this little lump, in order for it to do this, first thing it's going to do is it has to become aware of itself. So you've got the main divinity, then you've got this divinity, and it needs to become aware of itself. Once it develops that self-awareness, it's then going to become conscious of that awareness. As soon as it becomes conscious of that awareness, it can focus inwards, it can focus outwards, and then inwards and outwards is then created. And this is where it then understands that it is divinity. It has an inwards, it has an outwards. It is conscious of its existence. And so it is conscious of its existence separate and other to itself, its original starting point. And so we now get something called the first veil. And this veil is the veil of separation. Okay, now, I'm not going to go through the whole process. If you want to understand that, there's the book. But once it becomes conscious of itself, it can then really look at, or it can start experiencing that consciousness, and it can start then kind of comparing itself. And as it starts comparing itself, and it starts looking at other souls and where they are, and it then builds up an identity of who it is because it's conscious. It has a memory of its consciousness. And the memory of its consciousness then starts creating the layers of identity. And we call that the veil of self. Okay. And at the veil of self, the first structure and element of the egoic consciousness can be born. So for some of you that are into more kind of like the planes, you would, or not the planes, but the dimensions, if you look at the 10th dimension being heaven, this would be kind of almost an 8th dimensional consciousness. So the 8th dimension, it's kind of sunk down enough to get to the 8th dimension. At this point, consciousness itself and divinity may then start to manifest within it. A little structure, a little thread. It can look at the left, look at the right, look around, look at the density. And over time, it's going to start sinking down. And it connects to the cosmic consciousness. And we've then got the universal veil. Let's just have a double check here because I'm make sure I'm getting this right and doing it justice. And at the universal veil, we've got the divine structures as they come in. And as the divine structures start coming in, it just gives the soul like a focal point. If it's got something to focus on, it's got something not to focus on. It can focus on this, it can focus on that. And it starts building up layers and layers and layers of understanding, layers and layers of density. And it starts sinking down through the different layers of consciousness, where we've got here, until it gets down to the inner veil. Okay, and the inner veil, this is the point at which it's really started to create a consciousness that's strong enough to start supporting an incarnational consciousness. Now it's going to create at that point you sort of got around that point. Again, I'm not doing this exactly verbatim and everything. If you want to understand Rick's work, you go and look at Rick's work. This is just an understanding of it. So at that point, it's then going to start creating 7 layers or so. We kind of call them the karmic consciousness. It doesn't have any karma at the moment, but it's the density is going to start creating these layers. The very bottom layer of this, you've got the inner veil, the very bottom layer, and each veil is obviously a point of separation. The very bottom layer is where the incarnational consciousness comes in, and that is the densest layer of consciousness. And it's that incarnational consciousness which is strong enough to start supporting a human egoic and incarnational structure, where it's separated from divinity enough, it's become strong enough that it can then support an egoic thing. So when it's in its lifetime, and you kind of incarnate, you're in your lifetime, and the very first few lifetimes, you're going to be like a demigod or something along those lines, because you've got no concept of powerlessness. You haven't learned that yet. So you start choosing challenges where you might have your power taken away. You might use your power and then you get screwed up like an Egyptian pharaoh, and you get killed for it. So then in your next lifetime, you hold the fear of power. And so in the next lifetime, you choose a lifetime where you become a victim on the other side. So you become aware of what power is, how to use power. And that might be many different lifetimes around the power, but you need to be able to hold something you need to be able to hold a rejection of self so great that you can understand, or that you can believe that you are not fully powerful. And so once you've kind of released all of this and sort of what you're not, your soul from its incarnational consciousness, we think that a soul ascends. It doesn't. A soul starts off and descends over lifetimes and lifetimes of gathering up layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of separation. We've all been killers. We've all been murderers. We've all been torturers. We've all been victims of all of these layers. We've all been powerless. We've all been suffering. We've all created suffering. This dissension happens. When the soul gets to the very bottom, just holding almost like a ball of light covered in so much mud, has no concept of what it is. It's so separated from divinity. It's so separated from the truth of the beauty that it is. Then eventually it's going to get the call home. And then through love, almost like water in kind of, washing up type thing, eventually it's going to soak through. So it starts gathering this up, and eventually the love within it and the light within it just starts slowly soaking through and starts releasing these layers, because the layers cannot stay. Nothing can stay in the face of love. Nothing can stay in the face of light. There is no darkness that can be more powerful than light. It doesn't matter how dark a room is. You walk in, shine a light, boom. So then it starts its ascension process, and it starts releasing. And so we then come into the law of karma. I'll talk about that in another video. But as it goes up, it starts going up, and eventually when it's released enough, it gets to the incarnational layer, the first layer, or the last layer coming down, but the first layer coming up, the core veil. Okay, so your core veil is your reflection of self. It is your egoic identity, your karmic identity, and all the distortion that you are not divinity itself is all held in the core veil. So if you look at somebody's core veil, or if you look at your own core veil, it is the part of you that is reflected in everything around you. So your attachment to everything around you. If I'm triggered by something, if I'm hurt by something, if I think somebody's going to leave me, it's because I'm holding worthlessness. If I think that I'm intimidated, I've got anxiety about a job or a situation in the future, it's because I don't feel that I'm enough. And so all of the pain in my life is all being created by this karmic distortion that I am not divinity, that I'm not beautiful, that I am not loved, that I am not unconditional love, and that I don't deserve unconditional love. And so as we then start releasing and doing our shadow work and doing our healing, we start releasing our attachment to these concepts until eventually our core veil releases. And when our core veil releases, it's a huge step in consciousness, because we go from the kind of human, earth-based, egoic consciousness to the more divine inner consciousness. And this is where we become what you call an awakened being or an awakened master. We still then have to keep going. So you've got deeper and deeper levels of awakening. We still keep going, but this is the first layer of becoming an awakened being. And it's not something which, we kind of go and we do loads of healing, suddenly it just happens. There's actually a lot of work that goes into it. It's actually quite a gut-wrenching process, to be quite frank, but it is there. So that is what the core veil is, and this is what the the ascension, the birth of a soul is. And so I will be talking a little bit about karmic acceleration, but this is the focal point, awakening through the core veil. So I hope that explains things. Bye. Oh, and by the way, please sign up, send this to your friends, etc., etc. Thank you.